What's up, brother? It's your boy, Mike Muse. Welcome to the conversation of the Mike Muse Show. It is the weekend before the big election on Tuesday that will determine the trajectory of American democracy going forward. Two different candidates have two different visions for what they want America to be, and it's going to come up to you, America, and for you to decide what is it and what America do you want to live in and how do you want to move the country forward. But we can't move the country forward and we can't have two different versions of America until you all go to the polls on Tuesday. And I got to be honest, on my radio show, I get so many call-ins that really have questions about voter protection, what to do at the ballot box, what to do ahead of it. There's so much anxiety around this election from so many different facets. But really, when it comes down to election day, unto itself. What are the rules? What can you do? And who do you call if you feel that you are being intimidated, if you feel that your vote is being suppressed? And so I brought in a major heavy hitter today to really help us just unpack that today. He is an incredible, dynamic human being that I've had the privilege of meeting a while back. Mr. Damon Hewitt of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. What is happening, good sir?
Great to be with you, Mike. This is quite a season for the nation, quite a season for voters, especially Black voters, other voters of color whose voices, are threatened to be silenced. And so we're here to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah. I mean, what you guys are working on so many different campaigns that really get down to assisting the voter when it comes to Tuesday and everything leading up to Tuesday, but really from now until Tuesday. What are some of the things that you guys are hearing across the country that made you ramp up so many different voter protection campaigns?
Well, Mike, at the Lawyers Committee, we've been litigating voter rights cases for decades. Also, for the last 20 years, we've been the co-convener for the National Election Protection Coalition, which is the nation's oldest, largest nonpartisan voting protection effort. And we provide free and nonpartisan and accurate advice to voters all around the country through our 866 Our Vote hotline and the 866 Our Vote website, ourvote.org website, and other means. But the reason why it's so important to get out the message is because there's a lot of confusion out there. Keep in mind, this is the first time a lot of people are voting since at least 2020, sometimes before. And the rules have changed a lot because after 2020, the summer of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, there were a lot of voter suppression bills. As people took to the streets to protest peacefully, the response was, let's silence those votes because we had record turnout in 2020 for that election, despite a global pandemic. And so you see voter suppression bills all around the country, and we'll file lawsuits about those, have filed lawsuits. But it's also important that people understand the rules you play by then are probably different now. The polling sites are probably different. Things like, mail drop boxes and what have you. A lot has changed. And so we have to make sure people have accurate word. But there's also, Mike, been a rise in mis and disinformation. And it used to be primitive, like robocalls. We litigated and won a case where people were told if you vote by mail, the information will be used against you by creditors to collect debts, by police to execute warrants, and by the CDC to force mandatory vaccines. That's obviously false. And the federal court found it was intended to be discriminatory to chill the voices of Black voters. So we won the case outright. But now people can use artificial intelligence and do that even worse now. And so it's important that everybody is on guard and that they have a place to turn to if they have questions or if they're confused.
I know that there's been a big dis and misinformation campaign from our adversaries, such as Russia, China, and Iran. I know Russia has an interest in the outcome of our election and hoping that former President Trump becomes the victor because President Vladimir Putin believes that former President Trump will be more sympathetic to the Russian plight, in particular in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Iran has a different interest. Their candidate they're looking is Vice President Kamala Harris. They would like to see her take the oath of office at inauguration in D.C. in January because they believe President Harris' administration will have a different outcome for Iran than it will be within former President Trump. And then you have China. China has taken more of a neutral position in terms of who they're favoring the outcome of the election to be, but nonetheless looking to sow doubt amongst the American democracy. These these foreign adversaries, audience, have become more sophisticated in really understanding the nuance of American politics. And so, Damon, with that being said, those are things that you know, but I wanted to just highlight and bring some attention to our listeners and to our audience about that. What are some of the ways that you're seeing our adversaries, such as Russia, China, and Iran, get into play that some of our audience members needs to be aware of as they head to the polls this weekend, and also too as they head to the polls on Tuesday?
Well, look, we don't have any documented instances of foreign interference through the election protection hotline, but we do read the news and we pay attention like everyone else. You know, I actually was privileged to serve on the Department of Homeland Security's advisory board on AI to prevent our nation's, or to protect rather, our nation's critical infrastructure. And part of that protection, frankly, is protecting not just somebody's fiscal capital, but also human capital, and also protect our elections infrastructure as well. What I can say is that in 2016, there's documentation about Russian efforts. Russian bots were created. These were fake online accounts trying to mimic Black folks and telling other Black people, do not vote. That is well documented. That was part and parcel of the effort. And look, what I tell all of our folks is that I think when you see and hear about these kinds of interests of foreign organizations or foreign countries and adversaries, what I would say is two things. Number one, their aim isn't always to change the outcome of the election, it's to sow doubt in ourselves, to sow doubt in our own systems, and to make people feel like there's nothing we can do or that the system is rigged, what have you. But I also tell folks another thing, which is it's not about them, it's about us. And it's not about foreign adversaries, it's not about any political party or candidate. It's about us in terms of why you should vote, but also the fact that we have to take our own responsibility to protect our own votes. And that's why we tell everyone to call 866-OUR-VOTE or visit us online or through Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp chat so that people can get accurate information. And the most important thing is find a trusted messenger. You know, people have to be very judicious and discerning as they're consumers of news and information. So people like you who are a trusted voice, you're not going to just simply spread rumors. You're going to give people facts and let them express their opinions, right? That's all very important and part of the democratic process. And any adversary who has a chilling effect on that or is trying to sow fake news, fake opinions, what have you, we have to be wary of that.
So let's get to it. You gave out the hotline, and we're going to keep giving this hotline number out again. Why should I bring that hotline with me to the poll on Tuesday?
Because as hard as poll workers work, they sometimes get it wrong. You know, a lot of us grew up following our parents to the polling site, or even as we grew older, you see the same people. Sometimes it's the older person in your community who works the polling site. When the sites, at least in the past when I grew up, were close to your house. You could walk there, right? And in many places, that's still the case. But even they make mistakes. Even people who look like you, even people you trust, can make mistakes. I remember working a polling site in New Orleans, my hometown, after Hurricane Katrina, where a poll worker said, you must have a driver's license to vote. And that simply was not true. And she swore up and down that was the case. And I know she had the best of intentions, and she comes from our community. And so the point is that people need another trusted source as an option. And so what we tell folks is if you encounter a problem at the polls, the instinct is either to argue with a poll worker, which we don't want anyone to do. The instinct could also be to leave. It's like a fight or flee type of response. We don't want people to do either of those things. Get the trusted advice about what your options are. So, for example, if you're turned away and you're told you're not on the list, you can't vote here, we know that in federal elections, you can request a provisional ballot, right? We know that that is the case, and you should be able to ask for that and be able to submit that ballot and make sure that it gets counted if you are eligible to vote. But poll workers may or may not tell you that. You have to make sure that you have a place to go if you get turned away. If you're in line before the polls are supposed to close, but the clock strikes 8 as the polls close at 8 o'clock in many places, and someone says the polls are closed, you can't vote. As long as you're in line before the end of the polls closing, you're supposed to be able to vote as long as you're in line, right? And so people need to know what their options are. If you
What
show up to
happens
a
in that
polling
case?
site, what's that?
What happens in that case?
Oh, in that case, anyone's supposed to be allowed to vote. In that case, If we got a call to the hotline about that, we'd be on the phone immediately with election officials, either at the local or state level, to demand and insist that people be allowed to vote. If necessary, we go to court. That would be a pretty quick motion, 8 o'clock at night. But sometimes we've had to do that to file emergency election day litigation, simply not to change any rules, but simply to keep the polls open and give people more time. If a problem arises in the morning, there's ample time to get polling hours extended. And that happens all the time, Mike. Pretty much every major election cycle, somewhere there's an administrative failure. And quite often, election officials agree voluntarily to do that.
Mm-hmm. Can you keep give us more example? Because this is what I want the audience to take away. Because sometimes, Damon, that people may not understand what they need to contest versus it just sounds like it's the law, right? It just sounds like it's the rule. And so they may not even know that they should be contesting or calling this hotline. So now we understand some of the provisional ballots, as you just mentioned. Now we understand that if we are in line before the polls close at 8 p.m., we have a right to still cast a ballot. And if a poll worker tells us different, we can call this hotline. The lawyers will be on the other side to speak with election officials and try to get a motion passed in order to resolve that issue. Can you give us some more common dynamics and challenges that you guys have seen in the past that may come back up again, or even that you have seen so far in early voting? Because this is really what I want to equip the audience with, to know that we all can get a funny feeling about things, right? But sometimes we don't know if we should be calling.
Right. So I guess another thing in that family of funny feelings is if you are feeling intimidated or threatened. I haven't looked up the case myself, but I certainly have heard from our team about an instance in which a voter called us and alleged that someone came to them in line and asked for their ID and asked for their materials, only to find out that the person was not actually an election official. They were actually with some type of candidate or party or what have you. And so, knowing what to do, and I think the thing to do then is not to give people who aren't entitled to the information, any of your information. It's on a need to know basis, but also to document and report, because what we don't want is just rumor and innuendo. What we need is documentation. And I tell you, every day we can see thousands of calls coming into the election protection hotline at the end of each night at midnight, because that's when the hotline closes down at midnight. I get a rundown from our team of all of the calls and instances. We can take all of these instances that may seem minute, and I start to identify patterns and heat maps about where it's happening and what are the issues, so that we can intervene in the precious hours or precious days before the polls close to tell local election officials or state election officials, here's what needs to happen. Here's what we need you to do to make sure people's rights are defended. Sometimes it's something that people may think is.
I want to get more specific. I want to get more specifics, right? So when you talk about this situation, there was asking for information. When should a voter give out information, right? And then what information is required by law, right? So now we know, audience, do not give any information while you're standing in line, right, to anybody. When you get to the registration table inside your voting location, Damon, at that instance, what documentation and paperwork is required? Or isn't required, right? Or what you can talk about.
It's going to vary by state. So I live right outside of Washington, D.C. in Maryland. And where I live, I didn't have to produce my ID. I was asked simply, what is your name and what is your address? And that was the method used to verify my identity. In some states, you're going to be asked for an ID. And so what's really important is there's no reason to walk into a polling site not knowing what you're supposed to bring with you or what you'll be asked for. You can call 866-OUR-VOTE as part of your being prepared to vote, to make a plan to vote. Because really the voting process really is make the plan to vote, actually cast your ballot. And in some cases, if you cast, let's say, an absentee mail ballot, there may be a defect or a question, and there's a process or a period called the cure period where you have to provide additional information about your signature or date of birth, what have you, right? And so the voting process starts with you making a plan. That's really important. So I wish I could tell everyone in America that all you need is X to go cast your ballot, but it will vary state to state. That's an unfortunate reality.
So we have two options then, Damon. We can go to our state Secretary of State website to figure out what is needed to vote, or
Sure.
a very simplified is just to call this hotline. And are you saying, Damon, this hotline, if I live in Michigan, I can call this hotline to figure out what is it that I need to bring to the polls? If I live in Ohio, I can call this hotline to figure out what I need to bring to the polls.
You definitely can, because when you call the hotline, the person answering the call is an attorney who's been trained, recruited, trained, and deployed by us. These are mostly volunteer attorneys all over the country, thousands of them. And we have legal manuals where we've trained them. We have legal manuals for every state in the country. And it's important because the laws have changed, as I said, and even since the laws have changed, the laws have changed. And what I mean by that is in Georgia, after 2020 election, we saw a big voter suppression bill, and it widely known is that people thought you could be sanctioned or criminalized for giving somebody food and water while you're waiting in one of those long lines in metropolitan Atlanta, right? However, we filed a lawsuit and we're able to get a court injunction that says if you're outside of the electioneering area, 150 feet away from the polls, you can get food and water in line. So people need to know these things, and you may not know it from reading the newspapers because things keep changing. So as part of you making your plan, our legal volunteers will be able to answer those questions and give you fair, accurate, nonpartisan advice so you can vote your heart's conscience.
So with that audience, I know a lot of you are very philanthropic. A lot of you are trying to figure out what you can do. I know in some instances it may be really cold that day, it may be really hot that day. You may want to bring some water, you may want to bring some hot chocolate. If you have a question on whether or not you can bring anything to the polling location, you can call this hotline, Damon, give it out.
866 our vote.
If you have any questions or you may not be sure about that. Damon, another question I have, I get frequently asked questions, is about cell phones. Can you bring
Mm.
cell phones into the booth? Can you take that picture? Can you take that selfie? Can you post that selfie? Everyone wants to represent the I voted sticker. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I don't know any election official who wants you to bring a cell phone into the booth. I know in many states that's actually prohibited. Even if you're standing in line holding your phone, you'll be told, sometimes you're told to turn it off, sometimes you're told bring it back to your car. So hopefully you did drive that day or have somebody who can hold it for you. That's ill-advised. If you want to take a picture with your I voted sticker, take it after you leave. Take it outside. But again, that's the kind of thing that both the regulation and the enforcement of the regulation is going to vary state by state.
Now, some people have asked me, can they bring their cell phone into the voting booth to maybe Google some of the lesser known candidates, the lesser
Mm,
known citywide positions, and in
mm,
particular to Google some of the proposals and resolutions that are on the ballot that they might not have had time to investigate.
right.
Can they use their phone in that moment to Google to get information?
It's easier to do, you're on safer ground doing it outside of the polling place. You know, a lot of us receive, voter guides either from your county or your state, or maybe from the League of Women Voters or a nonpartisan organization like that. Sometimes it's partisan stuff and they come fast and furious, right? What I would say is in almost everywhere I know of, you can take all your papers in with you, right? I actually took my voter guides into the polling site with me when I've early voted earlier this week, but I didn't bring my cell phone. I left that in the car.
Okay. Now, let's say this. You bring your cell phone, you probably shouldn't. You bring it to the voting booth because you just want to Google some information about a candidate. A polling worker sees you. What happens in that moment? Can they tell you, one, put your cell phone in your pocket? I'm assuming they can. But at that moment, can they rule your ballot as invalid? Can they ask you to leave? Or is that what they should call 1866 our vote?
What I would say is there'll be no grounds in that instance for someone's ballot to be invalidated. That wouldn't be appropriate. But certainly you could be asked to turn your phone off, uh, put your phone away, leave your phone with someone right at the entrance or outside. But you don't want to be caught taking video or photographs inside of a polling place or of a ballot because it kind of strikes up fears of what are you going to do with that, what have you. And look, it's just not necessary. That's not part of your voting process. And you don't need to do that to be an advocate. You want to be an advocate, you can volunteer for a candidate if you're partisan. You want to be a candidate for nonpartisan, you can volunteer with election protection as a poll monitor, or if you're an attorney, be a legal volunteer. That's the way to make your voice heard. So what I'll say is don't stir up trouble unnecessarily. But if you encounter trouble, give us a call.
I know some people are excited to wear their Vice President Harris t-shirt. Some people are very
Ah,
excited to wear their former President Trump's MAGA hat to the poll. What happened in that instance when you want to wear your favorite candidate's memorabilia to the voting place?
yeah, that's a big one. You know, we saw a video that I haven't authenticated, but it appeared to be a pretty ugly incident where there was a guy who happened to be a middle-aged, I guess, or older white gentleman wearing a hat that apparently had some insignia of a candidate or a party. And of course, it just so happened that all of the poll workers at this site looked to be black women. And in the video, things got pretty physical, actually, between them. And he took his hat and threw it down, and it seemed to be that he was being told he couldn't wear the hat. Avoid that, folks. It. Polling site. There's a prohibition on electioneering within you typically 100 or 150 feet of a polling site, and depending on how aggressively it's being enforced, you could be told your T-shirt, your hat, your buttons. That's electioneering inside. The reason why that rule exists is not to silence anybody's voice, but it's really to make the polling site a safe space for everybody. If you don't like Trump, if you don't like Harris, if you don't like, any candidate, and then you're faced with somebody or a lot of people with that paraphernalia, it can feel intimidating to you, right? So to make it a safe space for everyone, don't wear it inside the polling place. Or if you have a shirt on, put a jacket on.
Will they be turned away in that moment, in their instance, if they have? Because one thing to take off a hat, it's another thing to take off a button, but it's another
Right.
thing to take off a t-shirt if that's your only article of clothing that you have. In that instance, Damon, what happens then?
It is entirely possible that an election official would say you can't come in unless you cover that up or unless you step to the restroom and turn the shirt inside out for purposes of voting. So like the thing is like you may be questioned, you may be, let's say, confronted, not in a physical or violent way, but don't escalate it, right? There's an easy out. People got to ask themselves what's important for you, casting your ballot or casting your ballot while you're wearing the T-shirt of your favorite candidate.
Mhm.
So I know that it often rubs people the wrong way, but there's reasons for that rule. And so we're focused on protecting your vote and your voice to be able to cast your ballot. We don't support any candidate or any party at all through the Lawyers Committee on Election Protection. So we can't help you accomplish your partisan end. We can help you cast your ballot.
I love that. And finally, Damon, you mentioned it earlier. I want to kind of go back to it. Provisional ballot. What is that, and when will I be told to use it, and or when can I request it?
So you can request a provisional ballot if you're told that you're not on the list or that you're not allowed to vote here. Now, of course, we don't want people who know that they're not registered or know that they're not even eligible to register to request a provisional ballot because that could get you into some hot water. But provisional ballots are really a fail safe. Provisional ballots are provisional, meaning that it's not absolutely guaranteed that that vote will actually count. Um, typically typically they're a fail safe if there's some type of problem where you can't authenticate or demonstrate your identity. If they can't find your name on the list at the place where you want to vote, maybe you're in the wrong precinct. That happens sometimes as well because the precincts change. I always used to vote here, but all of a sudden you're told to go somewhere else. And guess what? You don't have time to get there because of your job, because of your kids, because of your life schedule, because it's almost time for the polls to close. So that's the time when you want to use a provisional ballot as a fail-safe to make sure that you have a fighting chance to have your vote heard. It's
What happens in that
important to note that,
moment? That's a good
yeah,
example. Say the polls
mhm,
close at 8, it's 7:45. That's a
right,
great example then because even recently my polling location changed, right? Thank God I'm paying attention, right? So it's
good.
7:45, poll closes at 8. I can't get across town to cast a
Right.
ballot. Is that when I request a provisional ballot? And then how do I know that it gets accepted? And then how do I know that it will be counted?
Well, great. So there's in every state you can follow up with the Secretary of State's office to follow up about your provisional ballot after the fact. If people need advice on how to do that, they can call 866-our-vote because provisional is exactly what it means. It's provided that you're eligible and that you can actually cast that ballot. But you always have the right to request it very good election officials, the poll workers will tell you that you can ask for one, or they will offer you one outright if you otherwise don't show up on their list or might otherwise be turned away. There's actually a voter lookup website in a number of states. I know there's one in Maryland where you can actually look up your website to check to see if your provisional ballot has been accepted. And so that's going to vary state to state. So we can actually help you through 866 Our Vote follow up about that.
Damon, this has been so helpful. Even I have learned, and I call myself an expert in certain things, but this is proof that there's always more to learn. And I'm so thankful there is an organization out there like yours that is fighting for voter protection on leading up to Election Day and then at Election Day. This number is simply amazing. I'm committed to memory already. 866 Our Vote, OUR Vote. Audience, please, 866 Our Vote. I'm going to broadcast this on my social media. I'm going to be playing it throughout the weekend. I encourage you to do the same thing. Help me out here. 866 Our Vote. Damon, thank you so much, my brother.
Thank you, Mike. Everybody, go out there and vote. Make your voice heard.